Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. And I'm very pleased to have someone that I know joining us today. She has been a speaker featured at the Conference on Religious Trauma twice. And I'm talking to Mandisa Thomas today. She's the founder and president of Black Nonbelievers, and she is also a humanist celebrant. So I am excited to learn more about that as well. Welcome, Mandisa.
Hi, Janice. Thank you for having me. It is a pleasure.
And where are you joining us from?
I am in the Atlanta, Georgia area, Fayetteville, Georgia in particular. I'm originally a New York City native, but I have been a resident of Georgia for, over half my life. So
Really? Okay.
Yes.
Well, you must like it, or you wouldn't have stayed there so long. It's got to be doing something for you.
Yes, I mean it is. It's much quieter than New York City. Of course, here in the Bible Belt South and in the state of Georgia, there are some, legislative things that are troublesome and problematic. So I think the thing is to at least stick around and make sure that we are making changes for ourselves and future generations. But I do love living here.
Yeah, you really are in the thick of it as far as being in the South. And certainly, so I'm Canadian and I live in British Columbia. When I think of areas that seem particularly problematic as far as systemic racism, I know it's everywhere, but when I think of the Southern United States, I feel like it hits potentially even harder over there.
It does. And now we're in my family and I are in the metro Atlanta area, which is a bit more progressive. It's actually a lot more progressive than the state of Georgia. I mean, we were fortunate enough to have, residents vote blue because Georgia is a red, i.e. Republican state. And it's very, very religious in your smaller towns and in the rest of the state, which does reflect in politics. And so we have to keep an eye out for that as individuals and a lot of organizations do as well. But we are fortunate that the metro area, which is very, very blue, very, very LGBTQ friendly, and we just hope that it continues to model the rest of the state for the future, as far as progressive measures and reproductive justice and all of those things.
Yeah, it's at once exciting and terrifying to be on this side of the border watching what's going on. And of course, in Canada, we also have some very conservative people who also tend to be quite religious and who would like to tell the rest of us what we can and cannot do. And we're just not having it. We're going to live our own lives and be as free as we possibly can be.
Absolutely, as you should, as we all should.
Yes. So this is a podcast talking about religion and particularly religious trauma. And you're a little bit different in that I don't think you grew up in a deeply religious household, but please tell us a little bit about your story.
Absolutely. So yes, you are correct, Janice. I wasn't formally raised or indoctrinated into religious belief. I did not grow up in a fundamentalist household religiously. Like I said before, I'm a New York City native, and I have a very interesting story. So my parents, my dad, who was raised by a very religious mom, my grandmother is very religious.
Okay.
Now my maternal grandmother, my mother's mother, and grandfather, my maternal grandparents were not as much. So I grew up with relatives who were Christians, who were Muslim, but also some who just did not believe at all. I was also raised in the Black conscious community. I was raised learning about Black and African history and culture growing up. I was exposed to Christianity through my voice instructor and singing in various churches in the New York City area growing up. And many of my peers were, of course, religious. Some of my family members were. Some of my uncles were Muslim. And so being in New York at that time, you were exposed to, a diversity of schools of thought. And I also learned early on about how Christianity in particular was forced on the Black community. So that was a part of the education piece that I was able to get from it. And when I would sing as a guest in these churches growing up, some of the things that were being said, some of the teachings were a little odd to me. And having been an avid reader as a child, my mother would take my brothers and I to the library, to different cultural programs. And so I read various forms of mythology, Greek, Roman, African, Norse mythology, and of course, getting a glimpse into Christianity. I began to compare and contrast early on about and wondering why these other forms of mythology would just consider that mythology and stories, but yet the Christian religion was pushed as something that was a part of our makeup in our communities, as well as the Islamic religion as well. So you had people following these stories, through and through, and basing their life on these stories that were not just placed in the same category as the other forms of mythology.
That's right.
And also learning about how, again, Christianity was forced and imposed on my African ancestors, which had a detrimental impact in addition to institutional racism and injustice. It wasn't lost on me. But in my communities, there was certainly a push to at least be spiritual, to have some sort of belief in some sort of divine entity. I just knew for me, it wasn't going to be a white God or white Jesus like many in the Black community followed. So it really, for a long time, I considered myself spiritual, but not religious, because for a while, I was sort of concerned about whether or not there was a God watching over us. I just knew it wouldn't be, the Christian God.
Right.
But I would say that for me, I began to re-identify as an atheist when I was in my 30s. In my teenage years, I remember being asked if I was an atheist when I was in high school. And when I asked what that meant, I was told that I didn't believe in heaven or hell. And I was like, well, that sounds about right, because I can never reconcile the concept of, what happens after we die, and just being okay with that, because no one had ever truly come back from the dead to, to say that was beyond a reasonable doubt, or that could not be explained by science and scientific method. So for me, I do consider myself fortunate in the fact that, in the respect of, I was not formally raised or fundamentally raised to be a believer. However, I did not escape indoctrination. There were a lot of things that I had to unlearn along my life's journey. Like I had to unlearn my stance on the LGBTQ plus community, even though I have family members who were gay and I loved them no less. But there was still there was still indoctrination about that community and also people. So there were things that I realized that I was encouraged to take on, some of which were inadvertently rooted in religious concepts, of course, patriarchal concepts, misogynistic concepts. And so I had to, but also I realized that there was also a very strong emphasis on Black culture, as well as being empowered as a woman. So there were things that I took and was able to gain from my upbringing that I know many religious people did not have the opportunity to get until they were older. So I did have my own divorce process when it comes to indoctrination, but definitely not in the fundamentally religious way.
Right. Yeah. I'm wondering, since you had a grandmother who was deeply religious, what did that look like in your family? How did that work out as far as family relationships?
So it was very interesting because, I mean, we all grew up in a working class neighborhood in New York, which I call a hood. But and of course, you don't, whether you were raised religious or not, you don't escape that environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so I saw where my grandmother, who was, again, very religious, made her kids go to church. My dad went to church. He hated it. But also, I found that my grandmother was couching a lot of things that she was going through in her belief and in her church attendance. There were a lot of things that I know she did not inherently deal with well, like my grandfather's infidelity and also the influence of the neighborhood on her children and also her grandchildren, meaning, my cousins and I. So there were a lot of internal things. And it seemed like there were excuses made for my father's eventual absence. He and my mom split when I was young. And so he really wasn't in our lives as much as he should have been. And it seemed like he was doing more for her than he was for us. And so there's a lot to unpack there when it comes to dysfunctional family dynamics, and also when it comes to this fundamental belief, but yet real life is not coinciding with that. And that was something that I definitely noticed. It did cause a bit of a strain with that side of the family in particular. Now, my mom, I was raised heavily around my mother's side of the family. It's not that I didn't know my dad's side. Again, we all grew up in the same neighborhood. We all knew the same people. But at the same time, there were many instances of being a little uncomfortable in my grandmother's house or where she lived. And now my mother would let me go to church with my grandmother if I wanted to. And there were I can count on one hand how many times I actually wanted to go, because she belonged to an apostolic church where they did all that screaming and shouting and doing all that carrying on. She didn't necessarily do that, but other people in church did. So it's definitely one of those holiness churches. And I was just like, wow, this is weird.
This is some crazy nonsense.
It really was. And so the churches that I performed in were like United Methodist, some Seventh-day Adventists, and they did not carry on in the same way that my grandmother's church did. So the whole evangelical, the Pentecostal, the holiness church experience, I was just like, yikes. But again, seeing how things transpired, and I don't, my grandmother can be a very lovely person. She can be very loving, but there are just some, sometimes that Christian love did not translate well, especially when it came to the estranged grandchildren, if you will. So that definitely was not lost on me. And and I had one uncle who was in and out of prison for some years. And, even with, like my dad and some of my aunts, their inability to sustain relationships in certain ways was not lost on me. And it really seemed like my grandmother was just simply hiding at times behind her belief in order to keep from really, and it's possible that she may not have known and still may not know how to do that.
Right.
But taking a long look into the failed marriage with my grandfather, and how that translated over to her children and also her grandchildren. So it says a lot about, the fundamental belief, but also not really coming to terms with the harsh realities of life.
Right. Yes. And death. And the harsh realities of death. I find that so many people religion is just a very large coping mechanism for many people. So they don't dare look into it too closely because they don't want to find places where it doesn't all fit together. They just really appreciate the fantasy of an afterlife where everybody's going to love each other and be together and we'll have a chance to get it right.
And, I see that even in my grandmother, because when my grandfather, he died, my grandfather passed away in the early 80s, and she still wears her wedding ring. I don't think she's ever dated anyone else.
Wow.
I don't even think she got a boyfriend when they were married, and she would have been well within her right to.
Right.
So,
right.
She didn't do any of that. And I really think that she may think that as badly as my grandfather treated her and also treated his children, that when she goes, that perhaps they might be together and things might be better in heaven. And it's like, wow, you're waiting a very, very long time. My grandmother is 93 years old.
Wow.
That man has been gone for a very long time, and she has not moved on from that.
Right.
And I think that's also another aspect as to how people hold on to things that aren't realistic. I mean, she should have moved on with her life once he passed away. And even before then. But she just really, it's almost like she's really sticking it out to the very end. And it's like, wow.
Yes. There's like that's a pretty serious level of commitment for that indoctrination. It's like there's a martyrdom fetish within Christianity. And this unfortunately keeps, especially a lot of women, but some men as well, keeps them in abusive marriages, keeps them in marriages that are just completely unhappy, but they fear that God will be displeased with them. I know that's how it was in my family of origin. So instead, two unhappy and unhealthy partners stay together, and the children are growing up in that environment, learning a lot of bad habits. So yes, difficult, and there's a not wanting to embrace reality because the comfort of the fantasy is so strong. And of course, for those of us indoctrinated in childhood, it's just very hard to accept the fact that maybe our parents were wrong.
Right. I had to grow up with that harsh reality, even as a kid, when I saw the very tumultuous relationship between my parents and also how that transferred over to me and my brothers. I had to grow up and understand, even as a young adult, that there were a lot of things that my parents got wrong. And I think it's a hard thing for us to admit that, and it's also taboo, right? You don't want to speak ill of your parents, you don't want to speak ill of your grandparents. But at the same time, it's like, given the lack of information back then, as well as these systemic and institutional factors that contribute to ignorance and people's inability to learn, because we're talking about systemic racism, especially here in America.
It's here too. It's in Canada too,
absolutely.
Unfortunately.
Yes. There are a lack of resources in marginalized communities in particular. So there's a lot of bad traditions being passed down. However, for us to learn more, it doesn't mean that accountability should be off the table, because as we get older and as we are supposed to learn better, we're supposed to do better. And I think it's okay for us to, God's not going to strike us down if we say that, a parent was wrong about this. And because we're all human beings, we should all be learning at some point in time about how to live better lives so that we can be better for ourselves, for our children, the people around us. But, for some people that is so difficult, and their belief and their indoctrination does prevent a lot of that or hinders it. And I see that a lot. In among many people, even those who come out of it. It's a lot.
It is a lot.
It's so much.
What a difference if we could just teach our children and teach everyone to tell the truth, that it's better to tell the truth. If we, when you shame someone for making a mistake, it doesn't teach them not to make the mistake. It teaches them how to lie and how to hide how to hide those mistakes, rather than if we could radically accept reality as it is and compassionately tell the truth and encourage truth telling. Instead of all the hiding and shame and sneaking around, what a difference it would make.
And also not just telling the truth, but being receptive to receiving it.
Yeah.
Because there are a number of people, and we see, a level of hypocrisy. We see it in religion that is very patriarchal, right? Mm-hmm. We see a lot of people who would love to speak their truth, but when it has to come back to them, there's a lack of accountability there. And if all of that would be received in objectivity and in care and compassion, and, I think that is so important, because I think sometimes it's hard to tell the truth to people who are not going to receive it well. They're going to react very badly.
Yeah.
And who are also, there are some family dynamics that are rooted in secrecy.
Yes.
That there are some things that you don't tell certain people just because you don't think they're going to, be able to handle it.
Right.
And as human beings, we do handle things differently, but that type of dynamic is very, very harmful to a lot of people. And yes, being able to objectively tell and receive it so that we are growing in a healthy way is so important. And it's so sad when that there are some people who aren't as receptive. And even if you just simply state the truth, it's just simply going to devastate them.
Right.
But unfortunately, it is a part of the environment that we live in. And, it's best not to try to cultivate that. But sometimes, it's just, and these are things that we have to be mindful of. Like I said, none of us escape indoctrination, whether it is religious indoctrination, whether it's family indoctrination, societal.
Right.
There's a number of, and there's more than one, right? There's not just simply one. And a lot of them are intertwined as well.
Yes, very true. Making things complicated. I wonder, I think people would be interested to know how you respond in your day-to-day life, because you do live in the South. And I know it's really common there for people to ask, where do you worship, or what church do you go to? How do you respond to that? And does it make a difference whether it's someone that's just a stranger or someone you know?
Well, fortunately, most of the people that I know do not ask.
They don't ask that question.
They don't ask it. It's always been strangers. And I remember when we first moved down here, I was asked by my beautician at the time, what church did I go to? And I thought that was such an odd and invasive
Exactly, because it is.
I thought, wait a minute. I'm like, wait, what? Like, I'm here to get my hair done. Like, why are you asking me that?
Yeah.
And so over the years, I've had, other folks, and it's almost always been other Black women who have asked, what church do I go to?
Right.
Not if I go to church,
right.
But I'll just tell them I don't go to church. So I've had a few people try to invite me. I remember one person tried to invite me to Creflo Dollar's church, and I almost snapped at her. I was like, don't you ever. I'm like, if you're going to invite me to a church, don't ever invite me to that one.
Yeah.
So you've had a few folks who, they may have just left it alone, and I get this, I get people tell me that I look like, I have a very familiar face. So I get a lot of people who tell me that I look like someone they know. And so a few women have asked, well, have I seen you in church? I was like, you probably haven't. No. The one good thing about where we live now and the metro area is that there are a lot of people who may go to church, or they just may believe, but they're not as intrusive as they used to be. because they realized that, Atlanta is the home of the churches and the strip clubs. So, it's very, very interesting. I mean, I'd rather go to a strip club than a church.
Yes.
But, there are, some folks who in my neighborhood right now, and I mean, it's pretty quiet. It's predominantly Black, but it's not necessarily a thing that people ask as often as they used to.
Right.
I think it does depend on where you are, but when I was asked on a regular basis, that was rough. It was just very interesting. And because I don't go to the beauty salons like I used to, because my hair is short, so I just go to the barber.
Right.
I'm not asked that question at the barbershop.
Right. Okay. That's good. And would you just respond by saying, I don't go to church, or would you say I'm an atheist, or would you not say I'm an atheist unless they press the matter?
There was one woman who approached me in the grocery store. It was me and my youngest son. And she said, hey, she startled me. I was like, wow. She said, excuse me. She said, I just wanted to let you know that God said everything will be all right. And I said, well, I'm an atheist. So, did your God tell you that? It was just so intrusive. And I've had a couple of people just approach me in a grocery store and say, hey, God is watching over you. Well, I don't believe in God.
Yeah.
So if it's that sort of thing, I will tell people boldly, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God now.
And I think it's reasonable to respond with that kind of force, because these people are in such a bubble that they think it is appropriate to talk to a stranger and say, I have a message for you from God. If that was a person on a street corner dressed in raggedy kind of clothes, and we would get them to the hospital, we would take them for a psychiatric evaluation, but because they're well dressed and maybe, we're in a church situation, we just play along with it like, oh, that's okay. Yes. Those people having that mass delusion that there is a God that is talking to them. So I think if people in public are going to be bringing that sort of stuff up, then we are very right to respond.
Yes. And what was odd about that was that my son and I were in like the greeting card section. I was looking at the cards, I was getting one. And then I'm like, I was wondering what compelled her to approach me in such a way that she thought that I was going through something, to the point where that she had to deliver that message. I'm like, I'm here with my son. We're getting cards. We're okay. I'm like, you doing that is very creepy. And it's unwarranted. It's disrespectful. It was very presumptuous. And I was just like, what? Like, what are you doing? So
I was traveling through the South in May, and we went to, I think, the Museum of the Cherokee Indian, which was quite a powerful place. And for dinner, we had gone to a casino, which was nearby. And so I'm in line paying for my stuff. And the cashier said to me, have a blessed day. Yeah, and I'm like, do you know where you're working? You're working at a casino. That's just, in Canada, I think Christians typically, if they're evangelical, they wouldn't go to a casino.
Right.
But I just found that, and I didn't even say anything in response. I could have said, no, thank you. I have other plans. Like, I don't know, whatever, but it just was
that is such a part of the culture here in the South, in the American South. It is, you can be some of anywhere and they will tell you to have a blessed day. It's just like,
you would lose your job. You would lose your job in Canada if you said that. That would be considered just quite rude, because people are there to do business. They're not there to hear anything about your religion. So that one was surprising. Is there, what would you say has been the most challenging thing about being a non-believer? Is that also because not only are you a non-believer, but you are a Black woman who is a non-believer?
I think one of the challenges is that because religion has been so systemic in Black communities,
Mm-hmm.
there are so many things that we have to deal with as far as the mental result of that.
Mm.
Um, so there are a lot of people who carry that church culture with them, even once they leave. And because there have been so many things that have occurred in Black communities, and Christianity being at the root of white supremacy, being at the root of racism and economic injustice, it has caused what I would consider like a psychosis
Mm.
towards, and there is a lot of appeal to white supremacy in ways that people they may not realize. So there's a lot of internalized anti-Blackness. There's a lot of internalized misogyny, which is called misogynoir in Black
Mm.
communities,
Wow.
where there are, a lot of Black men and women who just absolutely treat each other terribly because, because of the internalized. And I mean, it's a part of the human condition, right?
Right.
There are people, there have always been folks who have treated each other badly, but
Mm-hmm.
as a result of being institutionalized in America, in the United States, it is harder to get people, for one, to come out and disclose their non-belief. And there is still so much deference, and also there's so much anger with the church and anger with religion that in order to move forward, it's almost like a miracle, for lack of a better word, because there are so many people who are still stuck with this savior complex in marginalized communities, particularly Black communities, where the burden of leadership and the burden of work falls on very few people. And I see that as the head of an organization that focuses mostly on Black folks and other people of color. It's hard to get people. And I don't like to, I've never been one of those people who likes to play into people's emotion to the point of manipulation. I think people should support something because it has helped them, because it can help other people. And it's important for folks to, sort of pay it forward, if you will, to help us do our work. I think that has been one of the hardest parts, because I come into contact with so many people who still hold on to patriarchal ideals that they don't think that my voice as a Black woman atheist and a leader matters. That they will still they will give priority to either a white male voice or a Black male voice before they would mine, no matter how prominent I have become. So
that is so frustrating.
Very much so. It is harder to get people to support the work that we do because of this, this inherent mistrust of each other. Now, many Black communities have stuck together, right? Our stories are of perseverance and determination, but there's still a lot of internal strife. And that tends to rear its ugly head when it comes to, getting the resources that we need, and also getting people to actually speak up more and work together more.
Right.
That has been a huge challenge for many of us, because there's a lot of folks out here. We're still dealing with a larger number of religious people in Black communities. Sure. But at the same time, it's like, sometimes our organized efforts at times become thwarted because of the number of people who are still very hesitant to speak up and speak out. But also, you don't have to be, and some people are still very reliant on income that comes from from churches and also religious people, which makes it harder for them to speak up. But it's like, you don't have to, you can take some of that and support the work that we do, and representation. So that's what I have found has been among the hardest thing to deal with, because of the institutional factors and also still the stigma of being an atheist in Black communities.
Yes. Well, what prompted you to start Black Nonbelievers, and when was that? How long have you been around in that sense?
So Black Nonbelievers has been around now for 11 years. We
Wow.
started locally as Black Nonbelievers of Atlanta in January of 2011, and we just shortened the name to Black Nonbelievers and increased our scope nationally because there was interest in starting affiliate groups in different cities. And what really motivated me to get involved and also take the lead on Black Nonbelievers was how, first of all, I had one of my mentors who was very, very big on institutional racism and Black history, try to discourage me. She was still a believer. Yeah, she was still a believer, or she is still a believer, and found that she was almost horrified and scared when I said I didn't believe in God. But that was because she held her beliefs so deeply. But I was starting to engage with people and come across people who were messaging me privately saying that they didn't believe in God either.
Wow.
That they had trouble with religious belief as well. And of course, that was still like 10, 11 years ago. That was still very taboo.
Yeah.
To even, there's always been religious dissent. There's always been critique of religion in Black communities. But to actually say you didn't believe in God at all, it's like, whoa.
Yeah. That's a big one.
Yes. And so I knew that I was like, there has to be more of us out here. Perhaps they just don't know that our organizations exist. Perhaps they are just so surrounded by religious family members and friends that they don't think that there is an option. Right. And it became important to build up that network and build community among us, especially with those who could directly understand what it's like to be in Black communities and to struggle with this. And it is a struggle. It is a struggle. And so that is what I had no idea at that time that it would become my life's work.
Yeah.
But I saw the importance of it when we had our first meeting, and there were a good 15 of us in a group. And it was like, wow, this is what is needed for us and for us to contribute to the larger community as well. So, I think that's what motivated me, knowing that there were others who were out there, knowing that there were others who needed that support, and also knowing that you could have that place to go if you needed it. And that we were also building a community structure. So it doesn't have to be something that you just come through, once you get what you need and then you leave. Hopefully you come and you stay and help us build more.
Yeah.
So,
Well, how many members do you estimate that you have now?
Yeah, so it varies, right? I would say across, we have a network of over 8,000 between our social media platforms, between our email distributions, between the people who follow us. Like, for example, I thought it was very interesting that a former president of an organization was teasing or was ridiculing about the number of Twitter followers we have, which is almost now at 7,000. But I would say that that's still a very good number because quality has always been more important to me than quantity, because as we try to help, it's not just simply about us fighting believers. It's not just about us simply poking fun at religion. It really is about helping people overcome that trauma, overcome that, that sense of, if you felt shame about the identity, or if you felt that discomfort, it's about encouraging people to be more whole and being, and coming to terms with that identity and being okay with it, because no one has the right, no one has the right to ridicule you. No one has the right to shame you about your lack of belief.
Right.
And so we want people to know that that is okay, and that there are others out there just like you.
Yes.
And that you are not alone, and that we are mobilizing, and that we are putting things together.
Yes.
And so that was really, really what motivated me to keep going with this, because people were benefiting from us being here.
And what else do you do? So I know you have some cruises that you've been able to do, which just sound fantastic. And then you have conferences as well. So when you have speakers at those events, are these the types of things they're talking about? You know, building your secular community and helping people know they're not, they don't have to be isolated anymore. They are free to be who they are with their own beliefs or lack of beliefs.
Absolutely. And for women of color in particular, and that leads me to the Women of Color Beyond Belief conference that is coming up. And yes, we do a cruise convention, BNC Con, every year. We usually go with Carnival. There's a group of us that go among thousands of other people.
Sure.
And but whenever we have our events, we have speakers that are that talk about not just, in addition to coming out, as an atheist or non-believer and being comfortable with that, we also speak to other issues that impact people of color more broadly. Like we've seen the Supreme Court of the United States overturn Roe versus Wade. That will have a direct impact on women of color who already face disparities when it comes to reproductive care and reproductive access, who often have higher mortality rates and infant mortality rates and dying in childbirth and other health issues. How these policies, how these white supremacist, Christian nationalist policies impact our neighborhoods more because of the institutional factors. How these things affect us more. Also, how sex and sexuality often has much more of a detriment to us than other populations. And so these are things we often speak to, the things that do affect us more explicitly, and how the larger community can better understand how this happens, how state church separation goes simply beyond, prayer in the classrooms, but also how public policy can also be very, very racist in nature, how these things impact marginalized communities. So we have people who are on the ground who are not just doing this work, but who are also impacted by it, speaking on it. And I think it's important for the larger community to get a better understanding of what that looks like, and also how they can support the work we do, because we're not just simply waiting on anyone to resolve this for us. We encourage people to get involved. We encourage people, and that can be scary for a lot of people, but it's very, very important that we do. I had to think about what getting involved and being open as a Black atheist woman could have meant for my job that I was working at the time, what that meant for my family engagement. But at some point, being true to myself was more important than feeling like I had to conform. Because my job just couldn't fire me. Sure, they could try to make things a little bit harder, but, knowing what my rights were and also standing up for myself, it's important at the end of the day to stand up for yourself. And that is more important to me. And people have to do that at their own pace, but as long as they know that there's a support system while they go through it. So it's, but that's the thing that at our events that we get people to understand is that, first and foremost, that as a community, that we are going to be a resource and a support system for you, no matter what you're going through. It doesn't mean you won't be held accountable. When you make a mistake, it's like, okay, how can we parse that as peers? How can we parse that through with helping you find resources, but also making sure that's what you as an individual understand that you need to do. You have to put in that work as well. So it's very much a multifaceted process for a number of people. But first and foremost, people know that in our spaces, that they are spaces of support, of safety, and again, also and they're fun too, right? Everything's not going to be just simply cut and dry. There are a lot of things that we do in order to help with that. And so that's one thing I'm very, very proud of.
Is there an age demographic? And I'm also curious about, so Black Nonbelievers, does it do more people who identify as male tend to join, or female, or is it really pretty even, and what's the age demographic?
So our age demographic spans, but I would say that most of our members are in, I'm a Gen Xer. So most of our members are in a Gen X age. We have quite a few millennials or the older millennials. We do have some college age and Gen Zs. We also do have some boomers, right?
Wow.
I have members who were raised religious. They raised their families religious, and they came out of it. And I think that's a demographic that shouldn't be ignored.
Right.
But I would also say that at this point, it is now very much even when it comes to men and women, or male and female. We do have a huge portion of LGBTQ identified individuals. We certainly support all, LGBT. I mean, I identify as pansexual, so I'm a member of the LGBTQ plus community myself, and so much of our leadership is made up of LGBTQ identified folks.
Sweet.
We do try to make sure that trans identified folks are welcome in our spaces, because we know that is very much, and that's been us from day one, is that we've always been pro LGBTQ plus communities. And it's not just simply your heteronormative, even though there are times where we might need to be, mindful of that due to indoctrination, but we try to be mindful of the whole heteronormative cisgender type of, spectrum. So, we are very, very deliberate about that.
Yeah. I look at my daughter's generation, and they're in their early 20s. And I'm amazed, and I'm so happy that generation is really very much more accepting than any previous generation has been. And they are just not going to tolerate people being unkind or disparaging or withholding rights to members of the Two-Spirit LGBTQIA plus community. And I think that's beautiful. That to me speaks of some progress that humanity is making, even as we see the rise of right-wing nationalism around the world seeming to be pulling us back or pulling us apart. I think we're going into a tough time, and we need to stay the course. We need to keep our feet very firmly planted and not give in, and make sure that our voices are heard, and just keep doing the work.
Absolutely. And I'm also very much encouraged by the next generations. And the one thing I can say about my generation is that we were sort of a cross between, many of us, growing up in New York in the early 80s, it was, I am a child of the crack epidemic, or the crack era. And so we saw how that devastated many of our communities. And we saw a lot of, the result, on the tail end of the Black Power movements and how drugs infiltrated our community. So we are the children of those children. So we saw a lot, right? I'm also of the hip hop generation. And so there was a lot of what is considered old school, but also new school, coming up. And so I think for us as parents, because we grew up in a very, very transitional time, that we are able to understand. And as we see certain trends come back around, we're like, yeah, we remember this.
That's right. Something's familiar.
Right. And so we're not so far removed from those times that, that now we can't relate to our children. I think it's very, very important that, the intergenerational gaps, close, because I think it's important that for older people to remember when they were younger, and how they saw things, and that you continue to keep your mind open, especially as because the younger generations aren't having it anymore. Again, they're not scared. They're not being scared by the fire and brimstone anymore.
Right.
They have divorced religion in a lot of ways.
Oh, it's so exciting. Yes. I love doing the conference on religious trauma because we have people from such a wide variety of backgrounds. And indeed, the pioneers in the religious trauma recovery movement are in their 70s. So for them to have stepped out all those years ago and rejected religion and embraced reality, that really speaks to some inner fortitude that they had, and they really paved the way for a lot of us now who are coming up behind and saying, yeah, I divorced religion. I don't want anything to do with religion. I don't need it.
Right. I am big on paying homage to those who came before us. Part of what we do at Black Nonbelievers, in addition to our conferences, we do host like regular social events in our areas. We host general meetings where sometimes we have guest speakers, but we also are very, very big on the history of humanism and atheism in Black communities.
Yes.
Because there is a history there. Even if the wider community isn't aware of it, there have always been Black folks who have rejected and openly rejected and criticized religion in our communities. And so we often speak to that, and we often point that out to say, hey, even if you didn't know this person was explicitly a non-believer, now you do. And we're talking about some very iconic people in Black history as well. So for us to be a part of informing the general public and informing those who didn't know about the history of free thought, that religious
Powerful.
dissent in our communities is extremely important to us.
Yeah. Well, what resources do you recommend, or do you have resources through Black Nonbelievers for people who are, they still have family that are entrenched in religion, or what kind of things do you suggest for them to help them on their journey?
So we absolutely encourage people to, to seek therapy. And
secular therapy,
absolutely. And so we have, there are a few folks in our network that are a part of the secular therapy project, which is associated with recovering from religion.
Yes.
On
Shout
our
out
website.
to Dr. Ray.
Oh my gosh. And happy belated birthday.
That's
Cheryl.
right.
Yes. So awesome. I absolutely love him. On our website, we do have resources, things, books that people can read, links to documentaries like Jeremiah Kamara's Contradiction.
Excellent.
To try to have people to watch and understand how religion has impacted, how it has impacted Black communities. And also, yes, we do encourage people to seek secular therapy. We have partnered with My Choice, My Power Counseling. Shout out to Sundria Hall.
Nice.
We have on religious trauma group coaching. So we have held quarterly sessions for folks who are interested in, in dissecting that in a group setting.
Right on.
So yes, we do partner and collaborate with other organizations on that. There's a link to the Black Non-Religious Americans reports that was released in conjunction with American Atheists, which shows the data of what, the Black non-religious demographic goes through more than some others.
Wow.
So to help get a better understanding of why it is that we do what we do, has been extremely important to us.
Very interesting. So how can people support you and your efforts? Are they best to go to the website, to the Black Nonbelievers website? Or? Absolutely,
yes. You can go to blacknonbelievers.org. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So donations to us are indeed tax deductible. I am a huge proponent of encouraging people to support our events. So the Women of of Color Beyond Belief conference is coming up, which is a co-production with Black Skeptics Los Angeles and the Women's Leadership Project. Shout out to Sakibu Hutchinson and Bridget Crutchfield, two of my long-term sisters in this movement.
Nice.
So yes, definitely. And you can follow us anywhere on social media. You can find those links in our on our website, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have a YouTube show called In the Cut that airs every first and third Saturday. We feature special guests and we let people know about what's coming up with us. Kevon Cameron, who is our New York City affiliate leader, is the host of that show. So we have a lot of things going on that, we encourage people to definitely like and subscribe, support financially if you can, but also attend the events, because not only are they very informative, they are a lot of fun.
Yes. Oh, that's so wonderful. You have so much going on. I'm really grateful that you took the time to chat with me. I know people are going to be interested in watching this podcast. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Once again, thank you, Mandisa Thomas.
Thank you.